We continue this week in our series on God's questions. Last week we were in Genesis 3, and we considered God's question to Adam and Eve, "Where are you?" And now we turn to Genesis 4, to the story of Cain and Abel that is filled with a number of questions. Listen again for God's word to us this day. Now the man knew his wife Eve, and she conceived and bore Cain, saying, "I have produced a man with the help of the Lord." Next, she bore his brother Abel. Now Abel was a keeper of sheep, and Cain a tiller of the ground. In the course of time, Cain brought to the Lord an offering of the fruit of the ground, and Abel, for his part, brought of the firstlings of his flock their fat portions. And the Lord had regard for Abel and his offering, but for Cain and his offering God had no regard. So Cain was very angry, and his countenance fell. The Lord said to Cain, "Why are you angry? And why has your countenance fallen? If you do well, will you not be accepted? And if you do not do well, sin is lurking at the door. Its desire is for you, but you must master it." Cain said to his brother Abel, "Let us go out to the field." And when they were in the field, Cain rose up against his brother Abel and killed him. Then the Lord said to Cain, "Where is your brother Abel?" He said, "I don't know. Am I my brother's keeper?" And the Lord said, "What have you done? Listen, your brother's blood is crying out to me from the ground, and now you are cursed from the ground, which has opened its mouth to receive your brother's blood from your hand. When you till the ground, it will no longer yield to you its strength. You will be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth." Cain said to the Lord, "My punishment is greater than I can bear. Today you have driven me away from the soil, and I shall be hidden from your face. I shall be a fugitive and a wanderer on the earth, and anyone who meets me may kill me." Then the Lord said to him, "Not so. Whoever kills Cain will suffer a sevenfold vengeance." And the Lord put a mark on Cain so that no one who came upon him would kill him. And then Cain went away from the presence of the Lord and settled in the land of Nod, east of Eden. The word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. Would you pray with me? Now, Lord, grant that the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts might be acceptable in your sight, O Lord, our rock and our Redeemer. Amen. John Steinbeck's East of Eden is arguably one of the finest American novels ever written. Its title comes from the last words of Genesis 4, verse 16. It's one of my personal favorites. The novel tells the story of two families, the Hamiltons and the Trasks, of their lives in the Salinas Valley of California and how they wound up living there. Samuel Hamilton is a hardworking farmer, a father of 9 children, scraping by on in life on relatively infertile land. He is good and kind and warm and wise. Adam Trask, on the other hand, is not. We meet Trask when he comes to the valley and purchases one of the very best ranches with a mysterious fortune. We learn Adam Trask's story in a flashback. He had a brutal childhood in Connecticut, abused by his older brother Charles, who was a farmer, a tiller of the ground. In the early years, Adam and Charles bring their father gifts. Charles gives his father a beautiful knife that he's worked very hard to purchase, and Adam gives his father a puppy. Well, the father loves the puppy and disregards the knife. Sound familiar? And after that incident, Charles attacks Adam, brutally beating him near to death. Adam escapes, which begins his journey, which will lead him westward From its origin, this story sprouts from the soil of Cain and Abel in Genesis 4. Adam falls in love with a woman named Kathy Ames. Steinbeck describes her as a malformed soul. Her story is far too complex for us to consider today. But she ultimately gives birth to two sons, Caleb and Aaron. They had to have names that start with C and A to keep the pattern up, for they also sprout from the soil of Cain and Abel. Truth be told, in some way or another, all of our stories sprout from the soil of this story because this story is part of the human story. It's an origin story. Read from an anthropological standpoint, it illumines conflict and violence throughout human history. Cain is a tiller of the ground, Abel a keeper of the sheep. In every age in human society, there have been conflicts between herdsmen and farmers over land use and land rights. According to one scholar, the occupations of Cain and Abel place the story squarely amid the growing tension between farmers and shepherds, between settled tribes and nomads who were at odds in the dry climate of the early Bronze Age. So this goes way back. On a more personal level, this story reveals the origins of sibling rivalries, that longing for the attention from a parent. We know something about this morning with 4 boys being baptized and all of their older brothers up here looking for that attention from mom and dad. In the story, it's about attention from God. And God has regard for Abel's offering, but not for Cain's. And we are not told why. Through the centuries, people have invented reasons, but the text does not tell us. It's just the way it is. Family systems theory suggests that parents have their favorites among their children, and the children know who it is, and as parents, we can't fake it. If you don't know who the favorite was among your siblings, then you were likely the favorite, and your brothers and sisters will tell you. This creates tension among siblings, what we call sibling rivalry, born of that struggle for attention from mom and dad. Indeed, Cain and Abel's story is the human story. I use Cain and Abel when teaching about emotional triangles in family systems. The main triangle here is, of course, Cain and Abel and God. And as with most emotional triangles, one side of the triangle is more conflictual than the other two. In this case, the conflictual side is between God and Cain, or more accurately, Cain towards God. But Cain triangles his anger with God toward his brother Abel. And like most triangled parties, Abel has absolutely no idea what hit him, figuratively and literally. Imagine what would have happened if, when God asked Cain those first couple of questions in today's reading, "Why are you angry? Why has your countenance fallen?" Imagine if Cain had simply dealt with the conflictual side of the triangle and said to God, "Because you did not have regard for my offering." Or we could employ that therapist speak of, "When you do X, it makes me feel Y because Z." What if Cain had said, "When you smiled at Abel's offering and ignored mine, it made me angry and sad because you didn't like my gift"? Who knows, maybe Abel would have survived if we had just used some healthy family functioning here. Maybe we would have found out why God did not have regard for Abel's offering. For Cain's offering. I can imagine God saying, if asked, "Nothing personal, Cain. I just really like barbecue and I'm not a fan of coleslaw. But we'll never know. Because that's not what happened. It's not what usually happens in the emotional triangles of our lives. What usually happens is we end up directing our anger and our frustration at a triangled party, just like Cain did. We take out our anger on the innocent. God knows that we have this tendency within our souls. And in fact, God warned Cain about what might happen. Sin is lurking at your door, God says. Its desire is for you. You must master it. God senses that anger in Cain. And God knows that sin lurks at the door of his heart. There's an interesting twist in what God says next in the story. Forgive me while we wade into the weeds of Hebrew grammar here. My preaching professor would be very disappointed in me using such exegesis in a sermon, but I figure you guys are hardcore. I mean, it's a rainy Sunday morning. People are watching the Panthers game, but you guys are here at church, so you can hack it. The NRSV, the Pew Bible, translates the Hebrew, its desire is for you, you must master it, implying that sin desires Cain and that he must master that sin. But there's a problem with that translation in the Hebrew. The word for sin in Hebrew is chata, and that noun is feminine in gender. But the pronoun attached to desire, shukata, and the verb that's translated master, timshel, those are both masculine. So that means that they cannot be speaking of sin, which is a feminine noun. So they have to be speaking of Abel. God's warning would be better translated, sin is lurking at your door. His desire is for you. That is, Abel's desire is for you, Cain. He loves you. He's your younger brother. And then comes the word timshel. It's translated, you must master. But again, the relative pronoun is him. So it's not you must master it, you must master him. And that verb's meaning is linked to a sense of responsibility or governance to those who are in charge of things. In other words, he's your little brother. You're responsible for him. So in the Joe Clifford translation of Genesis 4, verse 7b, it would be, sin is lurking at your door, Cain. Abel loves you. You must care for him. Now, there's another issue with the tense of the verb. The Pew Bible translates timshel, you must master. Now, in Hebrew, it is in the cal imperfect verb tense and mood. I'm having post-traumatic stress from my second year of Hebrew right now. Most often, the cal imperfect is translated into the future tense. You shall master, you shall care for. But it can also be translated as an imperative. That's what the Pew Bible does. You must master, care for. And it could also be translated, you may master, you may care for him. In other words, it's a choice. Which brings us back to Steinbeck's East of Eden. Not only does that novel grow from the soil of this sordid story, the essence of the novel is contained in this very verse, particularly in how the word timshel is translated. At a critical moment in the story, Adam Trask's helper, Lee, who's basically like a Chinese butler, he's raised Adam's sons, Caleb and Aaron. He has a fascinating conversation with Adam and Samuel Hamilton about this verse he details how he spent years with the elders, the wise ones of his family, who actually learned Hebrew in order to determine how to best translate the word timshel. And Lee shares his wisdom with Samuel and Adam, pointing to the different translations in different English versions of the Bible. "Don't you see?" asks Lee. "The American Standard Version orders men to triumph over sin. The King James translation makes a promise in 'thou shalt,' meaning that people will surely triumph over sin. But the Hebrew word, the word timshel, 'thou mayest,' that gives a choice. It might be the most important word in the world. That says the way is open." Now Lee continues, "There are many millions in their sects and churches who feel the order, 'do thou,' and they throw their weight behind obedience. And there are millions more who feel predestination," that's the Presbyterians, "in 'thou shalt.' Nothing they may do can interfere with what will be. But 'thou mayest,' why, that makes a man great. That gives him stature with the gods. For in his weakness and his filth and his murder of his brother, he has still the great choice. He can choose his course and fight through and win." Lee concludes, "I have a new love for that glittering instrument, the human soul. It is a lovely and unique thing in the universe. It is always attacked and never destroyed. Because 'thou mayest.'" And Steinbeck concludes that section, "Lee's voice was a chant of triumph." God's questions in today's reading. Why are you angry? Why has your face fallen? Where is your brother? These questions are ever before us. As with God's question in last week's reading from Genesis 3, "Where are you?" God does not need to ask the question, but it is we who need to be asked the question. In the midst of the emotional triangles of our own lives, in the midst of sibling rivalries or rivalries between political parties or rivalries between nations for that matter, God asks us all, "Where is your brother? Where is your sister?" God's question calls us all to recognize we are our brother's keepers. We are family. We have a responsibility to one another, to love one another, to care for one another. Some would translate this as a command. You must do this. That's how John understood it in our New Testament reading this morning. Let us love not in word or in speech, but in action and truth. It can be a command, but others see it as a promise. You will do this. There will come a day when we will actually love one another as sisters and brothers in God's family. And through the character Lee, John Steinbeck suggests the choice is ours. Thou mayest. Each and every day, we make our choices to love or not. In a conversation with my colleagues Dale and Millie this week, we wondered, what if it's all three at the same time? And isn't that really the tension that defines our lives? Back in 2011, I heard the group Mumford & Sons for the first time. They performed on the Grammys award show, singing a song called "The Cave," and I was hooked. They offered an incredibly unique sound, a sort of alternative rock folk vibe with banjos and horns and fervently strummed guitars and passionate, complex lyrics. I downloaded their album the very next day. Sigh No More, it was called. And I loved the famous tracks on the album. They were amazing. The title track, Little Lion Man, that was a great one. Roll Away the Stone, an Easter anthem, if ever you heard one. There was one song on the album that never made the charts, but I loved it from the moment I saw it. It was titled Timshel. Can you imagine? A song on a popular album named for the cal imperfect third-person masculine singular verb found in Genesis 4, verse 7, part B. Well, it turned out that Marcus Mumford is as much a fan of Steinbeck as I am. And he was just as taken by the word Timshel as I am, and hopefully as you will be after today. And he wrote this beautiful song with haunting lyrics that offer a powerful version of God's warning to Cain. Death is at your doorstep, he sings. It will steal your innocence, but it will not steal your substance. You have your choices, he quotes Lee, and these are what make man great, his ladder to the stars. But my favorite part is the chorus. But you are not alone in this. You are not alone in this. As brothers, we will stand and will hold your hand. Hold your hand. You see, that illumines the great difference between Cain and us. Because Cain was alone. He was isolated. And we are not. We have one another. And we must stand together. We will stand together in love. We may stand together in love. Timshel.